our next session is about Turn 2020 and how this summer will be different. Hopefully that graphic that you're seeing is probably something that's reminiscent of maybe some nightmares you've been having recently as you've been thinking about how you're going to handle Turn this year. And, we've talked about, what does PPE look like for doing Turn? What does temperature scans have to, where do they fit in, since we're going into partially occupied units? So we're going to jump into that. I've got two folks that are helping with that today, both co-hosts of the Student Housing Insight, and have been just a huge help to me in addressing all of our topics that have to do with maintenance, facilities, and procurement as well. So I think these are two guys that are highly qualified to talk about this subject. We'll first talk to Lincoln Ogata, or introduce Lincoln Ogata. He's with Easy Turn, which is a turn board. Electronic turn board is the best way that I can describe it, but it's so much more. Lincoln could probably talk a little bit more about that. And then also Ken Miller with Buyers Access. And let me say that both of these guys have not just been on the vendor side, they've also been on the operations side. Lincoln, after his career in the Navy, worked in off-campus housing, and then later at University of Kentucky, he was moved into the P3 on-campus side of things with EDR still in Lexington. So he knows what it's like to try to do Turn on 6,700 beds. So he can tell you quite a bit about that. And then same thing with Ken Miller. He's been in the COO position for both on campus, both student housing as well as in C-suite positions, both with student housing as well as conventional multifamily housing. So guys, welcome to the webinar.
Thanks for having us, Wes.
Glad to be here, Wes.
Well, a couple of things. We'll go ahead and jump into it, but I wanted to talk about something that, as you and I started putting, or the three of us started putting together some notes for this, we started talking about things that, Lincoln, you're hearing from schools, because Easy Turn's not just for the off-campus crowd, it's for the on-campus crowd as well. And you're talking to a lot of schools that, you've heard things about altering schedules. And I know here near me and my alma mater was UNC Charlotte, and they announced within the past couple of weeks that they're actually pushing off until I think 2 weeks. So I think they're actually supposed to start classes on Labor Day. And, I think that introduces some things with staffing and that type of thing. But you actually came across a university that's going to that is evaluating, and actually starting 2 weeks early, which from an off-campus perspective and trying to coordinate Turn with leases ending, at the end of July, that could end up being a real big issue. So I don't know if you've got some thoughts and comments since hearing about that, or if you've heard of any other universities that are doing that as well.
Yeah, so like you said, I've talked to a lot of different people. We have a lot of universities throughout the U.S., and I mentioned this earlier in kind of a pre-talk, but it just kind of feels like no one really has the full answer of what to do here. So I feel like people are finding the challenge and enjoying, I guess, the attack of the challenge. But it seems like, for example, the university that I won't go into detail who that is, but they mentioned about starting earlier, and the reasoning for that was that they had some flexibility schedule-wise if they had to do some settling in, or had to do some extra gaps in time later on in case of a flare-up. Just like was mentioned before, though, the thought process seems to be either we're going to go back to normal, which nothing's going to ever be completely normal again, or the idea of kind of alternating in classroom time. So I feel like maybe their idea was to get people on campus and just kind of see how it goes. That's not the majority of what I'm hearing, but I thought that was very interesting. And I'm also kind of noticing a lot of people aren't communicating with each other as much as maybe not as much as I thought they might be. There's not really a book on this, obviously, so everyone's tackling it specific to their site.
Yeah, and I would say that's another big reason for making sure that you're tuning in each Wednesday for our what's happening in your region, because got to hear some very interesting things yesterday as it relates to what schools are planning, and some reasons why they're not planning anything just yet or not announcing anything just yet. And so even that in and of itself gives you some insight as to what they're thinking about, and can help you kind of predict your move. But as this slide says, I think that's obviously the first thing you've got to consider before you even start planning. So I want to move on to what I think everybody's focused on right now as it relates to turn, and that's ordering materials and supplies. Ken, you probably got your hand on the pulse of this better than anybody. You can tell a little bit to the audience about buyer's access and what you guys do, but you guys are seeing this firsthand as far as what the shortages and the pipeline for materials is looking like. So I'll hand that over to you.
All right, thank you, Wes. And if you can see, I tried to do my very best today to put on my remote trade show look. So hopefully this was helpful for everyone. So if you've been itching to get out and be somewhere in person to visit with somebody, or be at a trade show that keeps getting postponed throughout the year, this was my best attempt to make you feel at home. So hopefully you feel pretty good about yourself right now. You think, oh, geez, I can just reach out and shake his hand. No, wait, I don't have gloves on. So, but anyway, I just want to kind of start through this by saying that Buyers Access has been in business for about 35 years, and we've kept a lot of data and analytics over those years. And most recently, we've been tracking what's been going on in our industry as it relates to the recent events of happening. And as a result of that, obviously, all of our clients, the first thing they started doing was calling into our member services desk and saying, I need gloves, I need PPE, I need hand sanitizer, I need all these things, and I need toilet paper, and I need it right now. And fortunately, the way supply chain works is over the course of time, we've created this whole just-in-time process through our industry, and not just our industry, but speaking of it in general. So we only order things when we need them. We go to the grocery store when we're hungry. We order products and services to our properties only when needed, because technically we don't have a lot of space to store them in, or we don't have the budget to do so. So as a result, some folks got caught a little bit, and the supply chain got shortened as a result of that. So what we're seeing right now are the obvious things being in short supply, but more so looking out 90 days, we're seeing that other things are going to be in equal demand, only because it's taking a little while for things to ramp back up again, for manufacturing to happen. And as a result of that, the supply chain is going to be in a bit of a strain between now and really probably closer to the end of the year. So during this whole process, we've seen a significant reduction in purchasing from our suppliers, or excuse me, from our student operators and from our multifamily operators to the suppliers. So as a result of that, suppliers are scrambling around looking at alternative ways to keep things rolling and still have enough supply behind the scenes to make sure things are happening. So I don't expect you to go out and start hoarding a lot of supplies, but I do expect that you should be diligent about what you do have on hand. And if you have been locked in with one supplier, for example, that you reach out to us or other suppliers to look at alternative suppliers and allow us to dip into our supply network and possibly help you there.
Got it. So I know that you mentioned everybody started calling about PPE. Anything with, it seems like places are starting to get them more and more, but I also feel like, the original kind of reaction that everybody had was you got to save this stuff for the people who need it most, the frontline doctors and nurses and EMTs and that type of thing. What are you hearing in regards to beyond just masks, I think masks are something that everybody has been able to retool and produce and that type of thing. But other types of PPE, what are you seeing most property management companies and student housing providers order right now?
Well, I think the majority of things outside of the norm would be things. Obviously, gloves are important. We talked about masks, and as things become available, certainly we're on weekly calls with our suppliers. So, and we're also obviously plugged into them. So as things become available, we get notification of that, and then we pass that information out to our member network. But one other thing to consider especially on the student side, and even as it relates to conventional, is what are the maintenance folks going to do, and how are they going to be dressed to enter the units, and even can they enter the units? So things like footies that you normally see that your local cable person or a plumber that would be entering your house would wear. Are maintenance folks going to be required to do that? I'm sure that student housing operators are mulling over those decisions right now. If you're wearing gloves, how often they need to be changed? Because we've also seen that problem. Every time you go in and out of a unit, every time you get a call, what are you going to do, and how are you going to attend to those policies and procedures? So there's going to be a lot of what-if questions that folks are going to ask. But from a supply standpoint, those are the main things that are being asked for right now. But then a little beyond that, you get into things like cleaning supplies, and whether or not you should have those on hand, or whether you order them as needed, or if you're expecting a third-party cleaning crew to bring them. What is the procedure? And then
let me interrupt you there for a second, because I wanted to get Lincoln's take on this as well, because he's been on site. He's helped property managers with negotiating these contracts. I know we'll get into that a little bit. We'll get into contracts specifically within one of the next slots, but that one question about cleaning supplies, providing cleaning supplies versus requiring the vendor, and I've got the tracking and transparency bullet point down there as well. Lincoln, would it be a good suggestion? What are you telling folks? What are you hearing from other folks? Does it make sense to have your cleaning vendors supply those this year, or because everybody's waiting for that question from a parent on, hey, what was this cleaned with? So, what did it just get your take on that?
Yeah, so definitely. So again, we mentioned this just to talk about the best practices for cleaning. We know that things such as bleach and whatnot are going to be the main primary ingredients we're looking for in a lot of our cleaning stuff for this COVID specific issue we have here. And I'll just say from years of being on site, and when you have the cleaners provide their own, sometimes you don't know how many times something's been watered down. And this is not all cleaning vendors by any means. But I would just say some transparency. Again, these are kind of questions pre-COVID we never had to think about, really saying when someone's running around with a bottle, what is in that bottle, or what are you all using on this? What are you using on this? Now we're really going to want to make sure, and I'm sure Ken knows about this, but the amount of dilution that things are supposed to have, we want to make sure that in order for it to match what it says it has percentage-wise in the formula, it has to be diluted properly. And so really making sure we're not overwatering down certain things, that we're really getting a product to the surface the way it was designated or designed to be on there. So again, I think these are all the new conversations that we never thought we'd have to have before, but now it's going to come down to if you're going to provide your own, we need to see what you are using. It's also going to be important to equip yourself with knowing what products are used, because again, this might be a time that parents ask a question they never asked before, which was, what were the kitchens wiped down with, or what was used here and there. So I believe all these are just new things that we've never had to encounter before, that we're going to need yet another step to the turn process to understand what the chemicals are, what's being used, and if they're properly being used. So as far as who supplies it, I would say, if you are able to supply it and you want to be able to, or if you're really kind of dead set on using a certain product to maybe do that, it kind of lets you control what's actually being used, versus sometimes they do these runs to a store real quick and grabbing something maybe cheap or something. But just being able to really know what's being used out there is the important part.
So, Ken, when it comes to some local and state guidelines, I think we may be expecting, especially for for the restaurant industry, that there may be some changes in the guidelines, especially when it comes to their rating system of having to go a further level into doing something. Are you hearing anything as far as it comes to landlords and additional steps that they may be required to take before turning over keys?
Well, so far, I think most folks are trying to adhere to quote unquote the CDC guidelines, from what I hear the most part. However, we also know just from the last several weeks that every state and a lot of local municipalities have their own rules and regulations. So I think the watchword here is be aware of where you are, and then follow up with anything that may be pertinent to your particular area. So it's going to vary from place to place. I think that the other sort of point to bring home here is on the tracking and transparency side, is that currently today we have each property management company has some type of work order system that they're utilizing to go in and out of the units and be able to state, this is what happened when I was in there and this is what I took care of. What I've found in my past experience in running operations is that those are not always very complete. And I think what's going to happen now is that the policies and procedures that we've all got, our SOP guides on site, we're going to have to update those. And the updates are going to have to be very specific to what we did when we were in the unit as it pertains to cleaning. So if we're preparing it for turn, or if we're going in for a regular work order, we've got to be very specific about what we did while we were in there, what we cleaned with, what was cleaned, and then some type of checklist to go out the door. And this is going to task our maintenance staffs tremendously. So we've got to be very aware of that and find a way. I know a lot of folks are they've already been thinking about this, but a lot of folks have even begun implementing it, is how we best provide safety to our staff and of course our students while we're inside that unit or even in the common areas.
Yeah. More on that to come for sure. And we'll talk about that as we talk about entering occupied units here in a second as well. But let's go ahead and talk about move out day. A couple of things that I know we talked about that in our research that became apparent was we got to start thinking about issues with overlapping of quarantine. You may have a resident that ends up, on July 15th, they end up testing positive and they've got to go under a 2-week quarantine. Is now the right time to be putting your students on notice that, hey, if you go into court, you're set to move out. Should this almost be a part of the move out letter? That final notice of, hey, if you're placed in quarantine in these last few weeks, you should find another address. I don't know if that's the right thing or not, but wanted to just kind of get. I know you guys have heard some communities dealing with that issue. Haven't heard of any where it kept them from, they would end up doing a month-to-month lease or something like that, but that's been on the conventional side. What thoughts have you guys got as far as best practices with running into that issue?
So if I can go first on this. So I guess what comes to mind immediately would be that if you had a case like that on site, that maybe you send out something ahead of time to require them to contact you right when they find out. That way you kind of have an end date in sight. And I think that's really kind of maybe the best way to deal with that, and then kind of obviously a basis by basis type thing from there. But another thing that I thought about as you were saying that is I already have heard some of my customers even who are making rooms sit for 48 hours. I don't know if that was a state guideline somewhere or what that means to someone, because we keep hearing different amount of time that this virus can last on things. But I already do know some people are causing any moved out unit to be empty for 2 days, even before vendors go in. So that could really change And as we know, in a 15-day or 21-day turn, two days is huge. So I don't know exactly if that's going to be region, if that's going to be, something larger spread or larger recommended, better yet. But I do think that has, a huge possibility of pushing some things back. But again, just being able to account for that and really just document who's being quarantined. But when you think about 2 days, also you think about transfers, which is a nightmare those first couple of days of turn, and how much that would change a transfer, a double transfer, when you're talking about having to have a vacated room. So there's a lot of things to think about when it comes to that.
Yeah, things being, left behind. We're having to deal with that every year. And I think, state by state, there's typically some things, as it relates to how long you have to keep that stuff. But this year it could be for very different reasons. It could be because, I think for the most part, we're past what most of the universities were dealing with, which was spring break. They were already gone. How are they going to come back? You may end up having someone that ends up, getting sick and having to go on quarantine at home, and who knows? But I think that should be certainly discussed as you're putting together your turn plans. So let's move on to entering occupied units. We kind of started that discussion of PPE. Ken or Lincoln, is there kind of a set standard that you're hearing from facility managers on what is needed when conducting a turn? And obviously, I think as in student housing, we're mostly entering occupied units. Should that be stepped up a little bit, given the fact that we're moving into or that we're doing work inside of partially occupied units? And wanted to get your thoughts on if there's a certain amount of PPE that maybe the residents should be given if they're going to be in the unit at the same time a contractor's in there.
Yeah, so I don't mind talking on that either. So as we mentioned, it feels like the kind of baseline here is face mask and gloves, and of course the next steps to that is using proper use of those items. But I have heard, like Ken mentioned earlier too, about the booties. Kind of maybe that's kind of the flex thing where some are saying definitely and some are trying to back off. I get it. I been on sites where we're doing 50, 60 work orders a day. A piece sometimes, depending on the time of the year, but definitely going into several units. I could only imagine that extra sigh at every door, grabbing on that door frame and putting on one at a time and going about your business, doing work orders on top of that. But that's kind of the one I'm hearing go back and forth. But as far as the face mask and the gloves, and honestly, I'm kind of picturing a future, if you will, I guess a current future of almost disinfecting your way out of a room, just like you would do for a turn. You kind of vacuum your way out of a room or sweep your way out of a room. I just kind of see it as that being the new norm. And like Ken mentioned earlier as well, just the documentation and really making sure that they know what all you touched, where you were at, and as far as that time. Now, when you mention the residents having PPE, I think that's probably going to be a pretty strong discretion thing. I think as long as that communication is there, they can decide how they're going to come back into their room. And if they want to go and, by all means, double spray or, spray their areas that it was at. But I do think it changes quite a bit. Maybe it would be an uptick in people wanting to be done while they're there, which sounds like it would be more dangerous, but maybe just so they can see what all is being touched and dealt with. So I think a lot of those things could be up to change at least.
Yeah, certainly I'd agree with you too, Lincoln. I think that a lot of this stuff is going to have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. I think overall, if people are just aware of their surroundings and understanding that not everything is going to be transmittable, let's say, but at least be able to be in the unit to observe what's happening. So they have a comfort level if they're able to be there to see what happened and what took place and feel reasonable about what happened. And then, of course, the documentation is very important on the way out because, as you know, just from past experience before any of this started, just having regular documentation about what took place when you went in the unit, if it was repair or whatever the case may be, being a little bit more diligent about providing extra details on that. That extra 30 seconds of writing that down will save you a lot of heartache down the road. So be prepared to be diligent about what you're doing while you're in there, making sure you're documenting, and be sure that that information is being stored properly back within your work order system or in some shape, form, or fashion back at the leasing office.
Yeah, I think we're going to be asked for that way more, this year. Lincoln, you and I had a discussion about, about the whole thing that Mark Cuban put out about bringing basketball back and having that visible for everybody so they could see when the bathrooms are cleaned last and that type of thing. So I think that's really got to be kind of the mindset for how we're approaching turn, and understand that there's probably going to be a lot of questions. So let's go ahead and move on to vendor contracts and agreements. A couple of things here that I just highlighted. I think this year more than any year, you've got to make sure that it's understood that you need to have a little bit of flexibility on what health and safety requirements may be needed, because what's in place today could very well change 3 months from now when we're turning these units. So be mindful of that. And then that last thing kind of fits into what we talked about earlier. Get really specific in the contracts about the types of cleaning products that should be used. I think that's got to be spelled out in the contracts and agreements with your vendors as well. This is just a little bit of the stuff that we talked about that I felt like was worth sharing with everybody. Ken, Lincoln, anything else that you guys have?
Yeah, just definitely. Just again, with the flexibility, like you said, anyone in student housing knows that you sign your contracts months out, or you should sign your contracts months out. That's the target. But again, like you said, we've been seeing in real time here, week by week, sometimes day by day, requirements change on a national level, on a state level. So most definitely, the flexibility part is going to be important. And I think they're going to kind of come in expecting that. I think most vendors are going to be looking into that. And those expectations are big. And not to just, plug my own thing here, but, with Easy Turn, we're a system that helps you manage your vendors, and even the ability that we have to put notes in there about maybe any upcoming changes as they're going through executing the work. Obviously that can all change in real time. So if you need to add anything there last minute about the requirements, or wanting them to, just really put it in their court as far as telling them what products need to be used and what the process is, and that they understand it, that's just an additional part of our vendor management and that accountability. And that's what this kind of whole thing's been driven towards, is proper accountability of the vendors throughout this process, to make sure everyone is in compliance, because we are the ones, and I'm saying we as a former on-site, but property managers are the ones that are talking to the parents, and there's always going to be that line outside the office. So we're going to have those answers for those parents as they come through. And so we're leaning on the vendor's execution to do that properly.
Great.
Yeah, Wes, so just a couple of closing comments here is, in addition to looking at trends and looking at some of the things we're seeing on the supply chain side, one of the items that I didn't mention in detail is the Buyer's Access does provide a 90-day look ahead. So what we do is for anyone who is a prospective client of Buyer's Access, and of course we do this for our customers as well, but if you're looking to see what you might be able to do going forward, or you're trying to manage the whole expense reduction thing right now. You're dealing with, your pre-leasing is down a bit. In property management, there are two ways to make money. You either are able to raise your rents, or you're able to reduce your expenses. And if you get both of them done, then you get a gold star. And most of the time that the moon and stars don't align that way. So you have to play the game of, well, I'm not raising rents right now. I'm trying to get folks to come to class or come to my property. So as a result of that, I need to be able to reduce my expenses. So what we've provided now is a complementary procurement analysis. And within that, we take a 90-day look ahead. So we take all your expenses from the last 12 or 24 months, run it through our analysis engine, and then provide some look ahead for what do you really need to be ordering right now between now and the next 90 days based upon your prior spending patterns. So it'll help you with everything else you've got going on, get a handle on things. And it allows a little bit of sanity to be provided to that. And then we'll work with you on how to best order those products so that you're not blowing your budget for the next few weeks as you're trying to get ready for turn. And then you're also prepared for what's going to happen in the few months ahead. But what I've done on the exhibitor side is I've placed a few documents out there for you. There's the ability for you to go out and download each of those at your leisure, and happy to talk to you later about some of the ways that we can help you become as efficient as possible during some really weird times.
Well, thanks, Ken. I appreciate it. Just one thing that you see there on that last slide, we obviously move-in day as part of turn. We're going to be covering that on June 11th. So make sure that you put that on the calendar, because a lot of things are going to be looking different this year for move-in day for sure. So Lincoln, Ken, I appreciate you guys both spending some time going through this. I know it's hard to read the tea leaves, but I certainly appreciate you guys spending some time and giving your thoughts on it.